Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another episode of TU Stories. My name is Adrian Battle-Marston. I'm your host of this podcast. And today we have another special guest with us, and I'm going to give them the chance to introduce themselves.
Okay. Thank you, Adrian. Yeah. I am Rabbi Alex Salzberg. On campus, I am the executive director of Hillel, one of the Jewish student groups here at Towson University. I've been here for almost 3 years at this point, really closing in on that anniversary.
Nice.
But it's always been a little bit of a homecoming for me. I'm local raised, grew up about 20 minutes away. My parents are still there. And my father actually had an office in Towson and worked on campus for like 5-6 years at one point in the late 2000s. So coming back here, and I haven't even hit the closest connection to Towson yet. But coming back here has been like, it's felt like home the whole time. In part also because I got my master's here in 2011 in Jewish education. At the time, the construction project was not Smith Hall or the Health Professions Building. It was CLA. The LA building was a third of itself. And if you made a wrong turn, there were just these plastic sheets that if you pushed through them, the fear was you would fall 3 stories to your death. Sure, there were safety protocols, but it was just part of a building. That's where all my classes were.
Oh, that's incredible.
It was a lot of fun.
So now you are with Hillel.
Yes.
Now, do you still work with your synagogue, or is that...
No, my full-time life is here on Towson at this point. I am a member of a synagogue in the city called Beth Am, a wonderful place that I will be at usually multiple times a week, but that gets to be just for me and not my profession. My professional life is here, building community for Jewish students and helping to build a wider sense of community on campus in general.
Do you miss it at all? I know, because I worked in ministry a little bit and then I transitioned here.
Brief moments where like I'm reading something in a Torah portion, I'm thinking this is what I would love to say about this.
That's so true.
But I went from I had a pulpit for 6 years up in New York. I had a decade where I was in New York away from Baltimore and needed to come home. But in that decade I had a pulpit for 6 years and I was giving 52 sermons a year.
Yeah, wow.
And now I would love to maybe give 3. So it was the right balance. And if I'm giving 3 fewer sermons than I want, that's a lot better than giving 49 more than I want to.
It's so interesting you say that, because I try to sort of explain that dynamic with my wife. When I transitioned out of ministry to work in the DEI field, we were only long distance in our relationship. So she didn't fully see it up front and up close. And then when I transitioned out, I don't know if it's like a fatigue period, or I'm not sure what you would maybe want to call it, but I went through a period where I was like, I just don't want to do anything. Because of, anybody that's involved in any kind of ministry or spiritual leadership role, there's a lot that comes with it outside of just, speaking on a particular day. And last year was the first time I was really like, all right, I kind of want to get involved again with my church. Yeah. Was there anything like that for you?
A lot of that for me, a lot of the same. I knew, as I said, I spent 6 years in my pulpit and there were some really fantastic moments in it. It was a great community full of people that I'm still in touch with and still care deeply about. But the work was at times too political, and at times for me it felt very performative. Ritual is the best way I have to describe it, where I am up front and people are watching me go through the ritual motions, as opposed to going through them authentically with them. It didn't work for me. I didn't want to be that role model in that way. And what I loved was building relationships with my congregants, building relationships with their families, being part of their lives, and working in education with the students and with adult ed. And so coming to Hillel, coming to Towson has really been, it hit all the things that I loved about that work and took out a lot of the things that I didn't love. So it was a perfect move for me.
That's so good. So good. Now, can you share with us a little bit about some of the things that Hillel does? I know that there's a lot of community building, like that's a larger component, but you guys do a lot.
We do. We're constantly busy. Our calendar is always full.
Yeah.
And there are definitely some moments where students say, I really want to do this. And I'm looking at the calendar and when can I do it? We want to have another event with this other organization on campus.
Yeah.
And we looked at the calendar like, I guess that's coming next semester. I'm not really sure. So we have cohort learning opportunities for students to deepen their understanding of their relationship with the Jewish community.
Nice.
And with Jewish thought and Jewish text. We have meals kind of constantly. We're always feeding students, whether it's a Shabbat dinner or whether it's lunch and learn or whether it's an evening dinner program. There's always food.
I'm sure they love that.
College students, food is important. I remember. We have collaborative events with other groups on campus, and really we've ramped those up. We have holiday celebrations and celebratory, both whether it's a Passover Seder, which we'll talk about in a couple of minutes, or just a fun holiday-themed activity. We do all sorts of things and support our students as they grow into leaders, both on campus and then into their professional lives afterwards.
Now, you all, there's a lot that you all do throughout the semester. And, you talked a little bit about the transition that you made into Hillel. I'm curious to know what it was like in terms of the calling into this work, right? Because it's a career, but there is like a personal and spiritual tie into it as well. I mean,
I'll be completely honest, because it's just you and me sitting in this room and no one will ever hear me say it. I was skeptical. Of this work. I had to be a friend and two friends, one of them a friend and mentor, had to really push me to say that this was the right thing for me. That it was something that would speak to those aspects of my rabbinate, my career as a rabbi, that I found meaningful, and that it wouldn't be too demanding on my family life. It wouldn't be too demanding on just my emotional strength. I am as this maybe wouldn't make clear, actually very much an introvert, and I need to have some alone space. And
I resonate.
Which is why we're making a podcast, obviously. And was very worried that I would be, talking to people all day, every day.
Yeah.
And this work actually has the perfect balance of that, because I've also found that if I don't talk to anybody all day, I feel like the day is wasted. It doesn't matter how much work I got done on my computer. If there isn't some interaction with another human being, it feels like the day was wasted. And this work right now for me really does have that balance perfectly. But I had to be a little bit talked into it.
Yeah. Now, you all, to sort of transition a little bit, I mean, you guys are busy throughout the year, but spring semester feels like it's probably exceptionally more busy.
It's differently busy.
Okay.
I think, the fall semester it's very front loaded. Because we have, first of all, we're meeting all the new students. We've got all of our returning students that we want to re-engage and establish the community. And then we immediately dive in to the high holidays, which are in September or October, depending on the year. But then after that, fall semester really sort of quiets down and we get to just run regularly scheduled programming. The spring semester, on the other hand, it's almost like we're in this rolling downhill to the end of the semester, and just things keep coming and coming and coming. And so we started this semester with our Jewish community night at the men's basketball game.
Nice.
We had a couple of Purim celebrations over the course of this week, and then we go into Passover, and then we go into the end of the year and graduation. So it feels more one after the other now, but it's just a different vibe.
And this is a learning experience for me, but Passover feels like one of the larger celebratory experiences that you
are 100% correct. So no matter how you cut it, and I'm happy to talk through the different ways that you can arrange and think about the Jewish holidays and rank them. One of the go-to icebreaker questions in any Jewish group is, so what's your favorite holiday? And Passover tends to make it to the top of people's lists. But no matter how you rank the holidays, Passover is right up there towards the top.
Yeah.
It is one of what's considered one of the 3 pilgrimage holidays, according to the Torah, and it's considered the first holiday. It is also, and this is probably important, the most observed holiday amongst American Jews. The top 5 holidays in the Jewish year we have the high holidays in the fall that I just mentioned, which are Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, and then going into immediately after that, Sukkot. This is the beginning of the year. It's the new year. It's the Day of Atonement. It's a space of introspection and finding yourself and trying to prepare yourself to be better for the year to come. Works very nicely on an academic calendar as well, because you're starting your religious year and your academic year at the same time. And then in the spring, we have Passover and we have Shavuot, which Shavuot always falls after the school year and gets short shrift because no one's paying attention once the school year ends. It's a shame. It's a great holiday. But these Sukkot, Passover, and Shavuot are these 3 pilgrimage holidays where the ancient Israelites and then the early Jews would go to the temple in Jerusalem every 3 times a year, is what the Torah instructs, to make sacrifices, to come together, and to have a communal moment. And so these were the 3 primary holidays. Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur have risen in the communal sense as far as like being the most important because of the new year and that atonement sense. But those 5 altogether really are the central holidays of the calendar year. And Passover is, I would say, the most joyful of the bunch, probably. It's certainly the most family-oriented, and as I said, the most observed of all of those.
You and I had a chance to talk a little bit beforehand, and one of the things that stood out to me with the way that you described Passover was that at its core, it's about storytelling. Can you talk a little bit more about what that means for people like me that may not know too much?
So Passover, I mean, in so many ways, and as I've been thinking about this conversation, I've been thinking story after story after story has come to mind. I mean, Passover starts with a story. It starts with the story of the exodus of the Israelites from slavery in Egypt on a long, convoluted journey to the land of Israel that took them 40 years to get there, which, if you look at a map, it should not take that long. But they didn't ask for directions, and there we are. And so it starts with that story, and that story is at the core of how the holiday is observed. But even then, there are stories upon stories built around it. So in its original context, in the time of the temple in Jerusalem, the Israelites or the Jews would go to that temple. They would bring their sacrifice to the temple, and they would recite a passage from the book of Deuteronomy, from Deuteronomy chapter 26, the one that opens with "My father was a wandering Aramean." It is just a few verses that condense the entire narrative of the Jewish people up to that point, of descending to Egypt into slavery, being freed by God from the Egyptians, and then being brought to the promised land, and then a statement of gratitude for the fruits that were grown in that land. And so that story was recited by every single person who would come to offer that sacrifice in the temple. And then the stories just get added to that on top of it. That's still at the core of what happens at a Passover celebration. So the Passover Seder is observed either 1 or 2 nights, depending on where you live and the type of observance that you have. And at that Seder, it is all storytelling. Seder means order, as every Seder begins by saying. Somebody has to say, Seder means order. And we run through a series of rituals and prayers and foods and courses almost of the meal. And at the core of it, the thing that takes the most time is what's called Magid, which is telling the story. And it has that passage from Deuteronomy that you tell. And we also tell stories of the ancient rabbis as they sat at their Seders 2,000 years ago. And what did they do? And we read we say how they were up all night telling this story over and over and over again. And we recite how they are amazed at how they finally understand this after 80 years of telling the Passover story. Some new aspect of it comes to light and becomes clear only on that 80th telling of it. We see great value in telling stories, not just once, but over and over and over again, because we come to the story differently each and every time. And so it's this moment of coming together and telling stories. It's also intergenerational and communal in a very important way. When going back to the sacrifice again, so the Israelites would offer a lamb up as a sacrifice, the Paschal lamb, and having never done this myself, apparently a lamb is a large animal, and like a small family can't eat an entire lamb in one night.
Yeah.
And the Torah says very clearly that you need to eat all of it in that evening. And the only way that can be done is if you share it. It has to be shared. You have to invite other families in. You have to come together. You have to be as inclusive as possible. Otherwise, you are violating a divine commandment by letting that food sit overnight. And so it's so many aspects of it are meant to pull people together. There's a moment in the Seder where we are supposed to open our doors and say, all who are hungry, come and eat. Anyone who doesn't have community, come and join us. And every Seder I've ever been to, whether I was a participant or the host, we've always had people join us who are unfamiliar with the Seder, who maybe this was their first Seder, who maybe aren't Jewish, who just are alone this year because of family circumstances. And it's a chance to bring people in to that sense of community.
I absolutely love that with the way that you described it, because it almost feels, and I'm not sure if this is like the best word, but almost like a mandate to ensure that you are caring for the person that's next to you on a biblical level. And I love that.
No, and that's absolutely true. I would call it maybe not a mandate, but a mitzvah, which is a commandment.
Yeah.
Which is the same word, but with different words. And the ways that we do that, it happens throughout the Seder. So, for example, everyone's supposed to recline while you're saying the Seder. You're supposed to be at ease. As we're marking this transition from slavery to freedom, showing your ease is an important piece of it. And the other thing that you do is we get to drink 4 cups of wine or juice, either one, and you're not supposed to pour for yourself. You're supposed to pour for the person next to you, right? So I would pour for you, and you would pour for me in a way of taking care of each other, and also a way of just demonstrating to yourself that you are part of something larger than yourself, that there is a community there who cares for you and will take care of you.
Now, I'm imagining now, this is my attempt in sort of relating in some ways with, as a Black Christian, the way that our history is told, is celebrated through the church, through education, through a lot of different means. And there is like this mixture of like, we're celebrating like how far we've, gotten in so to speak, in, the last few hundred years. But we also sort of recognize the due diligence that we have in ensuring that things don't fall back into any way or form. Now, I can imagine that even throughout all of this celebration that you all are having, with the history that you all have, right? How much do things, like the Holocaust, how much does that impact the way that the storytelling is told and what it means to sort of remember those things?
So I actually have a specific story that I want to share, but that idea of recognizing that we have come so far and we have so far yet to go, and that we can always slide backwards, is again baked into the text of the Seder, the text of that narrative. We say in it every single year, this year we are slaves, next year we want to be free. Even as we're not slaves in the way that our ancestors were slaves in Egypt, there is still some form of slavery in our life. We recognize that there has been anti-Semitism throughout Jewish history, and that we have persevered and we have overcome each and every time. These are things that are part of the narrative of Passover, that it's not just reflecting on the freedom and the challenges of thousands of years ago, but it's reflecting on the freedom and challenges of hundreds of years ago, and just a couple of generations ago, and just this past year, and all of those moments. And at my family Seder, we actually share a recording. So my grandfather and his brother, my great uncle Morris, were survivors of the Holocaust. They grew up in Poland. They came to America together, the only 2 survivors of their immediate family. Wow. They came over and spent their entire lives living within 2 miles of each other in Boston for the rest of their lives, grew their families together, and lived these deeply enmeshed lives for the rest of their existence after losing so much of their family and not seeing each other for the majority of the war. But my great uncle tells this story of when he was in one of the camps. He was on a work detail where they were sent to a factory, and someone, he didn't know who, smuggled him and a couple of the other guys who were working in this factory a bag of flour. And they knew that it was the beginning of Passover. They knew that it was about to be Passover, and the food that they were given obviously was not going to allow them to celebrate Passover in any way. But my great uncle and 2 other guys who were with him took that flour, they mixed it, they used just the heat of the machinery in that factory to turn that flour, to mix it, and to turn it into matzah. They made, as he described it, just tiny little matzahs that are about the size of a silver dollar. And they smuggled those matzahs back into the camp from the factory, and they ate them. They gave them to the people around them to eat. He very proudly shared in this video that even the rabbis in the camp ate his matzah, a clear sign that the rabbis saw it as legitimate and as kosher and as authentic. And he was very clear that if he had been caught at any point in that process from start to finish, he would have been killed immediately. He would not have been able to tell that story. That story is so important to my family on a couple of different levels. It's important because it shows the way in which he was so connected to his faith and his tradition. It shows how important it all was to him, and how important it was for him to do that, not just for himself, but for the people around him. And he shared with me years and years later that we used to be a snowbird and go to somewhere in Southern California, and he went to a synagogue and he was telling this story to the random people in that synagogue, and the rabbi of the synagogue overheard this story, walked over to him and said to him, "I'm the one who smuggled you that flour. I'm the one who brought that to you." And they had never connected, they had never met, but that story was something that they both held on to so deeply and carried forward with them into the rest of their lives.
Wow. That's amazing.
So my family, we make sure we show this clip of my great uncle telling this story at every Seder. And my uncle, who was more traditionally observant than my family growing up, he would not have used a TV. He would not have used a computer on Passover because electronics are forbidden on those holidays. He was so pleased that the story was being retold in that way that even he wasn't frustrated that we were showing a video of him on Passover because the story was being told. And what I actually do now, somewhat for my own enjoyment and somewhat in his memory and in his honor, is I actually make my own matzah for Passover every year. And we carry that forward. And I will tell you and anyone who ever listens to this, homemade matzah is infinitely better than the saltines without salt, the ones that come in a box.
Yeah, I believe it.
Shelf-stable matzah is tasteless. Homemade matzah is delicious, but dries out very quickly, and you have to eat it within about 12 hours.
Gotcha.
And it's fun, and it's a way that I get to remember that story and remember him and carry it forward, and also share my love of baking bread, which is a thing that I enjoy doing as well.
Yeah. You said something earlier that really struck with me, was sort of the retelling sort of reveals different perspectives. It reveals different interpretations of what can sort of mean on like a personal, individual level to each person that's sharing it. That reminded me so much of like the sermons that I would preach, right? And hearing a colleague that I was in the seminary with would use that same text and pull something completely different out of it. It really shows how, I mean, these stories, whether they're biblical or just spiritual in nature, there is like a pluralistic approach to it where you are going to find something beautiful in it. And that's going to be really contingent on the experience that you have. And the value of that dynamic is that it can't really be replicated. That the way you're telling that story is going to be different than the person that you're hearing it. And that's kind of how the learning kind of comes in, right?
It's all about dialogue and retelling and finding that, exactly as you say, like that personal connection. And the best part of it is when I hear you tell a story, I'm going to learn something new and different from the way that I, as you say, as I would tell the story, as I would read it. And also, I think you write down that interpretation of the story, and I read it, and I get something out of it. But there's something in that live telling that is so much richer and so much better. And then we get to talk to each other about it, and we get to hear how it connects, and then we can create something even better that neither of us could have come up with on our own through that conversation.
Yeah.
And it's I think why religion is able to last for so many millennia. It's why we're able to find something new to say as we've been telling these stories for thousands and thousands of years, and yet we still are finding new things to say because we're doing it together.
One of the things that I sort of recognize, like let's say Black History Month, an example, that first I mean, the entire month is incredible, but there's something special about that first week, right? It's the first day. I remember in college, like, we were always super excited. We had all these programs that we had been planning, like, for weeks and weeks on end. And it all sort of led up to the Saturday, which this is where, like, we practice our Sabbath on Saturdays from Friday night to sunset on Saturday. And that first Sabbath, there was, I don't want to say like high, but like the energy in the room was very different than most other Sabbaths. Is there anything similar that you all probably have Passover or any other holiday,
I think that any holiday you spend a lot of energy preparing for, and there is no holiday that the Jewish community spends more time preparing for than Passover.
I believe that, yeah.
I have a text message that my wife sent out to our neighborhood WhatsApp group where she has a picture of Costco that has the Passover set. She shares out this picture of Costco where there's the Passover installation where they've got all of the matzah and all the other Passover goods are there. I mean, there's a joke that's told in Jewish communities about how any holiday that comes up, the grocery store will put matzah up on the wall. They assume that we eat it for every holiday, and that is not the case. It's Passover only. But already in February, there were matzah out at Costco.
Wow.
Because we spend so much time preparing for Passover. Traditionally, we clean the whole house. We have to, what's called koshering, which means really removing any leavening agents or even the contamination of leavening agents from all of our countertops and tables and dishes and cutlery and cooking implements. It is a days or weeks long process. Different families and different people have different levels that they will go to, but it is something that has so much preparation for it. And the Seder meal is such an elaborate setting and with so much food and so many courses that I think going into that first Seder is much that same experience that you're describing, that first Sabbath of Black History Month. We have been building towards this for so long, and now we are here, and we get to take a little bit of a breath, hopefully, and relax, but also we get to see the fruits of all of that labor that we've done, and it's magical.
Yeah. One thing that I thought of, this was an experience I had in the seminary, this is shifting gears just a little bit, but more so about just like reverencing of the Sabbath in particular. Now, when I was a kid, I will be honest, I hated Sabbath because it was a break from so many of the things that I had been doing like throughout the week. We take a break from like electronics, from TV. I don't think I learned to have an appreciation for it probably until I got to college. And I remember there was actually a Jewish buddy of mine in college where he was and this is probably just his own personal experience, but he was sharing the difference in the way that like I was describing what Sabbath was like for me, as if it was more like a chore as opposed to being a celebration for him in particular. Now, I don't know what your experience with Sabbath is like, but I'm curious to know what your
I've had varied experiences. I think my family right now has something very comparable to the experience actually that you were describing that you had growing up, where we are not on social media. We're not on technology at all. We're not watching TV. We're not cooking. We're not traveling. We're staying in our community, and we're going to synagogue, and we are hanging out in the house, generally speaking with company over, but sometimes just our family. And my kids will sometimes lament the ways that they can't do the things they want to do. They want to call their friends, make a video call. They want to play Minecraft. They want to even just listen to their Alexas. They want to listen to some music. And we tell them they can't do any of those things. I think, though, what I've also seen, what I know for myself is that break from technology and that break from the constant dinging on my phone is something that keeps me sane much of the time. And I also see, I don't think my kids would ever be willing or able to describe it this way, certainly not willing, but they also interact with their friends differently when we have removed all technology from the space. They are playing games with each other, they are running around with each other, and when we hang out with those exact same friends on a Sunday or a Tuesday, they're on screens. Sometimes they're talking to each other while they're on screens, or they're playing the same game on two different computers, but they're not interacting with each other as directly as what we see on Shabbat, as we see on Saturday. And so I think I hope and I believe, and only time will tell, that my kids will see the value in this and the way that it helps them build meaningful relationships with their friends, with their community, with one another as well, when they're hanging out. But it's something that you have to work for to have it, and you have to want that value, because putting away your phone is hard. Putting away technology is hard. Staying put is hard. It is definitely countercultural. But for us, there's no question that now the added advantage of it is so much more valuable than anything we might lose.
I want to land the plane here a little bit, and it's a question that I like to ask any of the guests that come on. And you shared a lot about the different journeys that you've been on, the career paths that you've been on. I would love to know, what is your why behind the leadership positions that you've been in, the one that you're currently in, and like what keeps you going, right? Because you described a lot of work, a lot of preparation, a lot of social bandwidth and capital that you're using all the time. What's the why behind all of that?
For me, it is and always has been about the importance of community, of having people around you who you take care of and will take care of you in return. That it's not a question that when you're in need, that they will show up for you. I see that in my life, with the community that I have in my synagogue and in my community. And that's what I want to, and we work to create in the Hillel for the Jewish students on campus. We want them to see the value of this community for themselves right now, for each other, and also to recognize that that's something that they could have in their lives after college if that's something that they want. And one of the things that we like to try and do is connect students with the wider Jewish community so that they can see the ways in which they can connect to community after college as well. College is this final moment where community and opportunity is just sort of placed in front of you, and then you graduate, and it's just, there's a world out there, and you have to figure out what to do with it. And so we hope that we are helping students find the ways that they're going to plug into Jewish life and Jewish practice and Jewish community after college. But as much as I am, as I said earlier, an introvert who really I do need my alone time. I do need to recharge by myself. And after a long day, I don't want to go out with my friends. I want to sit quietly, maybe watch TV or read a book. But even for me, being able to have people around me makes my life feel just infinitely more meaningful. It's funny. There was a stretch for about 6 months a year ago where everything that I read talking about quality of life said, you need to live near your friends. You need to join community. You need to do for other people. You need to have people over for meals. And every single one of those recommendations was just already inherently a part of my Jewish life. And it was the most affirming series of articles that I've ever read, because it basically was saying, I'm doing everything right. My life is fantastic. And I see that. I see the ways that my life is enriched by these practices and by these communities. And to whatever extent I'm able to help our students find that for themselves is absolutely amazing.
So one final question before we head out. Where can students find Hillel? How do they get in touch with you? How do they get plugged in? What's that process like?
So we have a Hillel lounge. We're very, very lucky. We have a Hillel lounge in Newell Dining on the second floor of the Newell building. There's an exterior entrance that says Hillel on a green awning. But if you go into the Newell Dining and you go upstairs, you'll see a sign that says Hillel with an arrow pointing to the right, and you can just walk right through dining hall and find us. You tell the cashier that you're going to the Hillel, and they'll send you right through. We're also often on campus and in the union and tabling or doing programs, and you can always just find what we're doing either by following our Instagram, which is Towson Hillel, or going to our website, towsonhillel.org, or just reaching out to our emails or any other way.
Rabbi Alex, this was a pleasure as always. So thank you again for taking the time to have this conversation. It's always a pleasure to talk, but this in particular, learning more about your story, your experience was something I really enjoy.
I'll admit that this is my first podcast and I was a little bit nervous. I didn't really know what this would be.
I'm so glad you didn't tell me that, because that's just like a lot of pressure.
But I know this was a lot of fun. I also really enjoy sitting and talking with you.
Definitely.
And one of the things I've done a lot this year is a lot of outreach beyond the Jewish community on campus to build with those relationships and to have them for us to turn to when we need them, and also just to enrich our own lives. And you've been a big part of that. So I've enjoyed talking with you privately, and now we get to talk publicly. It's just as much fun.
Definitely. Well, thank you all so much for tuning in. We'd love it if you all can, again, like this video and subscribe to our OIE YouTube page. We use this channel to not just post podcast episodes, but programs that are happening all across the campus every single day. And so we'd love it for you all to continue to support that. And with that, we will see you all next time. Take care, everyone. See you.